Hey guys, it's Cece, and welcome to a series of unfortunate discussions. So today I am here to talk about a series of unfortunate events, as is what I do in my A Series of Unfortunate Discussions video series. So today I'm going to be talking about The Miserable Mill, which is book 4 in a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, and I will be talking about episodes 7 and 8 of the Netflix series, and those are the final 2 episodes of the first season. So if the story is miserable or if it takes place at a mill, that is the kind of thing I will be discussing today. And let's just jump right in and get started by talking about some of my thoughts regarding the book. Book thoughts. First of all, this is the book that I remember the least about going into this reread. I remembered the first 3 fairly well in terms of plot, and this was a book I remembered very little about, so it was fun to go in and sort of rediscover the plot because I had forgotten so many details. This book is actually one that kind of upset me when I was younger, and I can see why. It is really scary in the ways that Klaus gets hypnotized and the ways that Violet is left alone throughout this book. Up to this point, the way the Baudelaires have gotten out of situations is that they have really worked together. And what's scary about this book is you start to see sort of a fracture and you have to deal with the fact that they can't rely on each other as much. That's scary for Violet because she is still dealing very much with the fact that she's the oldest child in the house and she feels this immense pressure to protect her younger siblings and she doesn't feel like she can. And it's scary for Klaus because he's doing things that are out of his control and that's terrifying, and sometimes he's not even present. I can't even imagine how upsetting that would be as like a 12-year-old boy to learn that, but pretty upsetting is what I would imagine. The hypnotism stuff is really scary. Klaus is not Klaus, and that can be so upsetting for both of his sisters, but I can also see how that would be really just deeply upsetting to do things that are really harmful and to not remember you did those things, but to still blame yourself for them. That's just like a lot to put on a 12-year-old. My absolute favorite part about this book is something that has made me a little bit bitter about the show, and that is the fact that in the book, Violet and Klaus very much have to switch specialties. By the time you get to the 4th book, you kind of get it. If there is an issue that's going to need book smarts, Klaus is going to handle that. If something needs inventing, Violet's going to handle that. And if something needs biting, then, Sunny, she can get on that. And what's really, really great, in my opinion, about this book is that Violet has to do the reading and Klaus has to do the inventing, and they both have to sort of live in one another's shoes for certain scenes of this book. And they not only have to learn how to do a thing they're not comfortable doing, but they also both recognize how difficult that thing is that their sibling is so good at. Violet has moments where she is constantly referencing little things that Klaus has told her about how he is so successful at reading, and there's like little bits of that in the show, but she stays up all night reading and is desperately trying to achieve this thing, and she's trying to put herself into Klaus's shoes to achieve it. And then that's great, but what the payoff is that later on, when Violet is in a bad situation, Klaus has to figure out how to invent something, and he has to figure out how it is that Violet does that, and he has to make his brain work in that way. And it's so fantastic because you get to see how they have learned from each other, but also how they bring certain strengths to this group, and I love it. It's my favorite part about this book, and I just think it's really, really fantastic. So those are my main thoughts about the book. Let's move on and talk about the show. Here we are, the final 2 episodes of the first season of A Series of Unfortunate Events. And I am very sad to say that these were easily my 2 least favorite episodes of the series. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that is before I get into talking about more specific thoughts about each element of the show. What really frustrated me about both of these episodes is that it felt like any element of balance between whimsy and darkness that they've had for the last 6 episodes went completely out the window. They just decided, we've been kind of whimsical up to this point, but what if we were just plain goofy most of the time? Like over the top, hamming it up. Let's focus on that instead. There's this scene near the beginning where Poe just does the same thing that he does in Reptile Room, where he kind of freaks out and keeps saying alternating statements that don't make sense together, and that was funny the one time, but it really wasn't funny this time to me. Also, I was so sad because I wound up being really disappointed by Rhys Darby playing Charles. Rhys Darby is from Flight of the Conchords as well as a few other things, and he's a supremely funny guy. And the problem was, that was all he was bringing to the table. He was just there to ham it up and be just the funniest gosh darn guy on the show. He just spent so much time going over the top and repeating the same lines over and over again, and in what appeared to be the hope that there would be laughs. And as it went on, I grew less and less interested in seeing him do that. I didn't care anymore. I have a lot more thoughts about Charles, but I will leave that for a little bit later. Also, one of the most frustrating things about these episodes was the leg incident, and this is where I had a problem with them deciding to go like full whimsy. So up to this point, there has been a whimsical element because this is an incredibly dark series, and it's good to balance that darkness out with the more silly element. It just helps the show to feel less hopeless, especially if you're showing it to kids. However, I think that there is a way to take that way too far because this series is specifically about not talking down to kids, and nothing has felt more condescending up to this point than the leg thing. So Phil gets his leg crushed, and in the book, it breaks. He comes back, he has a cast, he can't walk, and while he is still positive about it, he has a broken leg. And in the show, they just smooshed it, and he just had a flat leg. And then when he showed up later, I was ready for him to have, an amputated leg, and for that to be a really serious consequence. And instead he shows up, and he still just has this flat leg with a foot hanging off at the bottom. That felt so deeply condescending to children, considering the fact that we have spent the last 6 episodes killing people like a person an episode. I just don't understand why I am supposed to believe that we can let the children handle murder, but a broken leg that looks like a broken leg, a person with an amputation, no. He just smushed it. He just smushed his leg. That just really rubbed me the wrong way in terms of how I think the series is supposed to come across to kids and how the TV show came across to kids. Because the TV show felt straight up condescending. And then I also have to say, because I have to bring it up, the song was just a big no for me. I don't understand why they decided to include singing in the show. I don't know if it was just another attempt at being whimsical, or if it was just because Neil Patrick Harris was involved and he sings, and so obviously we have to let them sing. I've liked the intros up to this point. I liked Olaf's sea shanty in Wide Window. I hated his song in the first episode, and this felt just like a repeat of that, especially when it came to getting Lemony Snicket involved in the singing. It felt completely out of character and odd for there to be a group musical number of all things. Okay, so those are my reasons why The Miserable Mill Parts 1 and 2 were my least favorites of the season. So I guess now I'll go back to doing what I usually do and talking about some of the more specific stuff, positives and negatives, but I just wanted to get that out of the way up front, that those were things I had a really huge issue with. So why don't I talk about the kids? Because I've been talking about the kids for this entire video discussion series. Lewis Hines is still great, in my opinion. As much as I didn't like a lot of the stuff that happened, I thought that he did a really good job of portraying the ways in which this book is supposed to be a scary one. He did a really good job of coming across as, actually frightening in certain moments when he was hypnotized, especially when he would be standing off to the side somewhere and he would just have this teeny tiny smile on his face, or when he has the small smile on his face when he's using the stamping machine. I thought that those came across as legitimately eerie, and so I think he did a really great job with that. I also loved a line that he had in here. I don't remember if it was episode 1 or episode 2, but it is when Charles is talking to the Baudelaires and he is making excuses for Sir. And he says, "You have to understand, Sir had a very bad childhood." And Klaus looks at him and goes, "I do understand. I'm having one myself." And I thought that was such a great way to really shut down how hypocritical that statement is, because I think that it can be a thing that you say to kids that they're like, "Oh, he had a hard childhood." Well, then wouldn't that... No, we're just gonna... Okay. I really like that the episode offered a lot of that tension between Klaus and Violet that I mentioned really loving in the book, as that tension starts to build, but there's still a very negative vibe that's going on between them in the book, and I liked that the show brought that, even if it was in a different way. And actually, one of my favorite scenes of the entire 2 episodes is when Klaus decides that he's going to go off and he's going to face Dr. Orwell alone, and he's marching towards the building shaped like an eye, and then there's just that shot of Violet's hand hand sliding into his, and we pan up and we see Sunny, Violet, and Klaus holding hands, and they are going to take on whatever it is together. It was such a great way to explain that they've had these tensions, but when it comes down to it, they 100% have one another's back, and they're going to be there for each other no matter what happens to any of them. I also thought it was a great way for Violet to make clear to Klaus that she has no reservations about the fact that he harmed Phil, because I think that that was the thing he was really concerned about. He felt very, very responsible for that, and so it was a great way for Violet to be like, no, I don't blame you. I stand by you no matter what and against anything. However, I have to mention this because I mentioned it was my favorite part about the book. They took out my favorite part of this book, and that is the fact that Violet and Klaus have to inhabit one another's roles in this book, and that was just like completely ignored. So Violet has kind of a scene where she's trying to read a book, but the thing that gets in her way is that all of the books are blacked out. Not that she is going to have a hard time reading, because that's not her specialty. And the point is that in the book, she is trying to figure out how to get him back, and you get a lot of that isolation that Violet feels. But instead, she saves Klaus, and Klaus is like, here's everything I know about hypnotism so that you don't have to figure it out, and then we got no Klaus inventing at the end, which there was just no balance. It was my favorite part of the book, and it was really disappointing to see them completely ignore that bit of character development for the kids. So why don't we talk about some of the guest figures that appeared in these 2 episodes. I'll start off with Catherine O'Hara. She played Dr. Orwell. I love Catherine O'Hara, so I was excited to see her. Unfortunately, I didn't like her as much as I've liked some of the other guest people that have appeared on the show. No one's ever going to come close to comparing to how much I loved Joan Cusack. But overall, I think Catherine O'Hara did a pretty stand-up job. I haven't seen her in stuff for a long time, so it was really fun to see her in this, and to see her being kind of an evil character, kind of a kooky character. It was bringing back a little bit like Beetlejuice vibes, so overall, I enjoyed her. So, Rhys Darby as Charles and Don Johnson as Sir. I'm not going to talk about their portrayals as much as the changes that were made in the show. So in the show, when you meet them, there is this great little play on words where they say that they are partners, and then Lemony Snicket talks about the fact that partners can have a lot of different meanings, and that maybe partners means both. And so there's the implication that Charles and Sir are in some kind of relationship. So I saw this on Tumblr long before I got to this episode. I saw that they were going to make Charles and Sir partners, and that made me really excited for numerous reasons. First of all, I love that they played with the word partners. It is so within the style of the books for them to be like, partners has multiple meanings. Here are all of the different meanings that it has. Or they could be not mutually exclusive. That was just so in the style of the show, and so I thought it was a great move. However, I didn't really end up liking the decision. So I have been hoping, since they started doing this show, that because it was going to be a Netflix show, we were going to get a little dose of that Netflix including queer characters in all their shows thing. I was really pulling for it. And I'm really upset that this wound up being the only representation of queer characters that we got in this first season, because I think that we primarily only got to see how Sir and Charles were dysfunctional, how they had an unhealthy relationship. It annoyed me further when Sir said that his method was don't ask, don't tell, which, intentional or not, there were clear pauses made there and clear implications made, and to have the only gay character make jokes about don't ask, don't tell, and how he approves of don't ask, don't tell, upset me no matter how it was written. And I was also frustrated by the fact that we saw no signs of affection between the two of them. There was a little teeny tiny moment where it looks like Charles is going in for a kiss and he gets denied, and it is because Sir constantly pushes him aside throughout these 2 episodes. And I was just frustrated because this is a kid's show and I wanted kids watching it to understand the implication that they were in a relationship. I was just annoyed that it wound up feeling hidden, unless you were old enough to understand the language that was being used. I was really hopeful about their being in a relationship, but overall I was kind of displeased by how it wound up being portrayed in the show. Let's do some positives. Daniel Handler, he showed up at the beginning of The Miserable Mill Part 1 as part of his same character from The Wide Window. Mr. Poe is yelling at him about where you would look for orphans, and he gets to do kind of a deadpan line, and I was just still excited to see Lemony Snicket hanging around. I think that there were a really nice number of VFD references, both verbal as well as like visual references. We got to see a lot of like the name of the dictionary, which I'm not remembering now. There was a moment in the hypnotist's office where the eye exam is just VFD over and over again in different sizes. I liked those a lot, as well as the verbal ones. I really liked Lemony's like sad, grimy hotel room where he sits to solve crimes, basically. That was just very within my visual of Lemony Snicket as a character, just sort of like sadly sitting on his old, grimy bed, watching old movies with everything about the Baudelaires hanging up around him. It's always fun to see Lemony Snicket in different environments that he actually inhabits instead of being a narrator, because I think that we get to know a little bit more about who Lemony Snicket is, so I liked that a lot. And what was up with that thing at the end? So they're at the boarding school, which for some reason I'm not remembering the name of currently. Sorry, I'll look it up after I film this. But we got to see a little class photo, and who should have gone to school together but Lemony Snicket and Count Olaf, who has always had the same hair, and that appeals to me. And let's just say that's the only thing we're going to talk about as far as Count Olaf in this episode. Let's just... Alright, so the big twist in this episode was the fact that Will Arnett and Cobie Smulders were not in fact the Baudelaire's parents, but they were actually Mr. and Mrs. Quagmire. This is sadly a plot twist that I had revealed to me very early on after the show was released. After I watched, I think, the first 2 episodes, I found out that they were the Quagmires and not the Baudelaires. I didn't really think they were the Baudelaires, but you know, I hadn't gone straight to Quagmire. So this is sad for numerous reasons. First of all, I think they did a good job of portraying it in a really upsetting way. Like, it was legitimately upsetting the way that they wrote that storyline. I felt like I was getting really attached to those two as characters, and then we got to see them living in their home again, being with their kids again. I loved the relationship that Cobie Smulders and Will Arnett built up over the season. I never expected to like them sharing scenes so much, but they were fantastic, and I was so sad to see them go. Plus, it was really upsetting to see more kids orphaned, obviously. And not just orphaned, I mean, yikes. It's exciting for me because I love the Quagmires. They were one of my favorite storylines when I read the books first when I was younger, and so I've been talking about the little hints and mentions we've gotten of the Quagmires for the previous few episodes, so the fact that we actually got to see the Quagmire kids in this episode was like thrilling. I was so excited. Another one of the reasons this was really sad that we had to see these two actors go is that I think that they have been the 2 strongest actors thus far in the show, and so I was kind of sad to see them leave. Okay, one last negative thing I want to talk about. So the hallmark, I think, of my discussions up to this point is that I have been very focused on the color, because I think that the color design has been beautifully done until these 2 episodes. Any ounce of meaning that has been involved in the color for the previous 6 episodes was so destroyed and completely made irrelevant in these 2 episodes, and I was really upset by that. The best moment that they have, I think, is from the beginning of the episode when the Baudelaires are walking through the woods and it is supremely bright. The picture that they are holding of the secret society has gone way up in terms of saturation. It's no longer sepia toned, it's a color photo, and it's so bright. And then they see the mill for the first time and the saturation just plummets and everything goes almost entirely into gray tones. That was fantastic, and I loved it. But after that, the color choices were completely nonsensical. It threw every theory out the window. It was just like, what if we made this person wear bright colors, and then everyone else wears dim colors, and we'll just swap back and forth willy-nilly. Oh, and the kids, your outfits are going to be bright for like no reason for a little bit, and for some reason, Shirley is going to wear a super bright dress, and Dr. Orwell's office is going to be bright. As someone who's been so invested in the production design of this show, it was just a huge disappointment to me to see all of the potential for meaning in that thrown away. Yikes, guys! I'm sorry to end on such a bad note here. I didn't really want this to go as downhill as it has. I have been mostly positive about the show up to this point, I would say. I really liked the first 6 episodes, and I will watch a second season if it comes out, but I was really disappointed by these last 2 episodes, and I think that they were the weakest and the weakest in terms of adaptation as well. What were your thoughts on The Miserable Mill? Did you like it? I'm sorry if you did. I'd like to hear the reasons you liked it down below. What were your opinions about the show as a whole, of the entire first season? What were your general feelings? Mine are generally positive, but now they have that sad tinge of negative on the end there. I'm excited to read your comments and to hear your thoughts about the show. I'm gonna go dig myself into a hole in the tag on Tumblr, look up some little Easter egg listicles and such, maybe learn more about the show. Thank you guys if you have been watching all of my series of Unfortunate Discussions videos. These will be coming back in the future, presumably, to talk about future episodes and books, so I hope that you've enjoyed them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!